Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching the Today I Found Our YouTube channel, and in the video today we're looking at a Harrier jet, Pepsi, and John Leonard. Back in the halcyon days of 1995, Pepsi launched their aptly titled Drink Pepsi, Get Stuff campaign that allowed customers to earn points on every Pepsi product they bought and then exchange them for things like Pepsi-branded t-shirts and hats. The promotion was a roaring success and resulted in nothing of note happening whatsoever, unless of course you count the guy who sued them because they refused to exchange 7 million Pepsi points for a Harrier jet. The man in question was John Leonard, and in the later months of 1995, he turned on his TV and saw this ad announcing the Pepsi Stuff promotion. For those who don't want to go and watch the advertisement, it essentially shows a teen on his way to school highlighting items that one can buy with Pepsi points, such as a Pepsi t-shirt for 75 points, a leather jacket for 1,450 points, etc. The book, The Law of Marketing by Linda J. Oswald, describes what happens next in exquisite detail. The scene then shifts to three young boys sitting in front of a high school building. The boy in the middle is intent on his Pepsi Stuff catalog, while the boys on either side are each drinking Pepsi. The three boys gaze in awe at an object rushing overhead as the military march builds to a crescendo. The Harrier jet is not yet visible, but the observer senses the presence of a mighty plane as the extreme winds generated by its flight create a maelstrom in a classroom devoted to an otherwise dull physics lesson. Finally, the Harrier jet swings into view and lands by the side of the school building next to a bicycle rack. Several students run for cover, and the velocity of the wind strips one hapless faculty member down to his underwear. While the faculty member is being deprived of his dignity, the voiceover announces, "Now the more Pepsi you drink, the more great stuff you're gonna get." The following words then appear: Harrier fighter, 7 million Pepsi points. Upon seeing this commercial, Leonard, a 21-year-old business student, did a little research and came to a startling conclusion. The Pepsi Harrier giveaway was actually an amazing deal at only 7 million points. You see, in 1995, the value of a single Harrier jet was about $33 million, give or take a few million, depending on whose estimates you want to use. This meant that even if every 2-liter bottle of Pepsi only awarded a single point, in reality, many bottles and cans offered more depending on where they were purchased, the Harrier jet would only cost about $7 million in real money. To confirm there were no loopholes here, Leonard got his hands on a Pepsi Stuff prize catalog. While no Harrier jet was listed there, he did notice it stated in the small print that if a person already had 15 Pepsi points, they could purchase an unlimited number of additional points towards any item they wanted for 10 cents apiece. This meant Leonard could effectively purchase the Harrier for a mere $700,000 and wouldn't need to pre-purchase millions of dollars of Pepsi products to do it, making the whole business venture significantly less risky from a financial standpoint. And so it was that on March the 27th of the following year, Leonard sent 15 Pepsi points, an order form with the words "1 Harrier jet" written in the item description, and a check for $700,008.50, $699,998.50 for the remaining 6,999,985 points, and a $10 shipping and handling fee. He sent this to the required address and waited. Pepsi later sent the check back with a letter explaining that the Harrier jet was not a part of the offer, nor was it included in the prize catalog, and its inclusion in the advertisement was merely intended as a fanciful addition to make the ad more entertaining. The letter also included a bunch of coupons to apologize for any misunderstanding or confusion. Of course, Leonard was dead serious, in the previous year having managed to convince 5 unnamed investors to back his little venture. When later asked by the news about why he was so intent on getting a Harrier jet, Leonard explained that as a member of the so-called Pepsi generation the company was advertising to, the notion of owning a Harrier jet appealed to him enormously. Of course, with investors involved, it's far more likely the group was simply looking for a large out-of-court settlement. Whatever the case, when Leonard received the response from Pepsi, his lawyer responded in turn on May the 14th, 1996. Your letter of May 7th, 1996 is totally unacceptable. We have reviewed the videotape of the Pepsi Stuff commercial, and it clearly offers the new Harrier jet for 7 million Pepsi points. Our client forwarded you your rules explicitly. This is a formal demand that you honor your commitment and make immediate arrangements to transfer the new Harrier jet to our client. If we do not receive transfer instructions within 10 business days of the date of this letter, you will leave us no choice but to file an appropriate action against Pepsi." Oddly, rather than reply themselves this time, Pepsi forwarded the letter to the ad company responsible for the commercial, who replied to Leonard stating that the offer was clearly a joke, adding that they found it hard to believe anyone had actually taken it seriously. However, perhaps at least being a little nervous over the issue, in order to avoid copycat lawsuits, Pepsi promptly changed the price of the jet in its ad from 7 million Pepsi points to 700 million. But they still had to deal with Leonard, who sued Pepsi for fraud, breach of contract, and deceptive advertising. The case limped through the courts for 3 years. While the court of public opinion was strongly on the side of Leonard and his investors, after all, the commercial clearly stated that if you acquired 7 million Pepsi points, you could exchange them for a Harrier jet, the court that actually had the power to issue a ruling was not. The issue was finally settled in 1999, with the judge concluding that no objective person could reasonably have concluded that the commercial actually offered consumers a Harrier jet. It is notable that Leonard's legal team attempted to argue that no judge could accurately determine whether the target audience of the commercial, the Pepsi generation, would or would not conclude that the commercial was really offering a jet, specifically noting, "A federal judge is incapable of deciding on the matter, and that instead the decision had to be made by a jury consisting of members of the Pepsi generation to whom the advert would allegedly constitute an offer." In any event, as to the accusation of fraud, this too was thrown out, as commercials aren't considered legally binding offers under the Restatement Second of Contracts Treatise, which notes, "Advertisements of goods by display, sign, handbill, newspaper, radio, or television are not ordinarily intended or understood as offers to sell. The same is true of catalogs, price lists, and circulars, even though the terms of suggested bargains may be stated in some detail. It is of course possible to make an offer by an advertisement directed to the general public, but there must ordinarily be some language of commitment or some invitation to take further action without communication." Finally, the courts ruled that not giving Leonard the Harrier wasn't in breach of contract, as no written agreement between the two parties involving the giving or receiving of a jet had been drafted or signed. As Arthur Linton Corbin notes in Corbin on Contracts, there would be no enforceable contract until the defendant, PepsiCo, accepted the order form and cashed the check. As Pepsi did neither, there was no breach of contract. This all leaves one wondering, had the courts ruled otherwise, would Pepsi have been able to give Leonard the jet? The answer, according to Pentagon spokesman Ken Bacon, was decidedly no. In response to Bacon's assertions, Leonard stated that he would take a Harrier jet in a form that eliminated its potential for military use. The US military has in the past, for instance, sold tanks to civilians after the weaponry was removed. In response to that, Bacon claims that doing the same to the jet would strip it of its ability to fly, rendering it useless. That's not to mention that a Harrier jet uses a massive amount of jet fuel per minute of flight, varying depending on what you're doing at the time, and requires millions of dollars of maintenance over the course of its lifetime, both of which make it prohibitively expensive for all but the richest to operate. But of course, it is likely Leonard and his investors were never actually interested in the jet, just the potential payout if the court ruled in their favor. Leonard attempted to appeal the court's decision in 2000, with the ruling ultimately upheld. And now for a bonus fact. If you love the cult classic Monty Python and the Holy Grail, you partially have band members from Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, and Genesis, as well as Elton John, to thank for it. That's according to director Terry Gilliam. He stated, "There was no studio interference because there was no studio. None of them would give us any money. This was at a time income tax was running as high as 90%, so we turned to rock stars for finance. They all had the money, they knew our work, and we seemed a good tax write-off. Except, of course, we weren't. It was like the producers. In total, the rock stars contributed approximately £80,000, about £600,000 today, to the movie, or approximately 40% of its budget, with 6 other private investors footing the rest of the bill. The extreme low budget for the film ultimately resulted in some of its best gags. For instance, they originally planned to use actual horses in the film, but couldn't afford it, so instead came up with the idea of having the actors act as if they were riding horses while their assistants used coconuts to make clopping popping noises. In the end, the film, which wasn't expected to do well, grossed £3 million, about $19 million today at the box office, off an initial budget of £200,000, and has continued to earn well since in various home media incarnations, TV spots, and streaming online. Incidentally, Beatle George Harrison funded Monty Python's next film, Life of Brian, to the tune of £3 million because he wanted to see the movie. The film ultimately brought in about £15 million, or about £69 million today. So I really hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, please do hit that like button below, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Also, over there on the right, a couple of other videos you'll probably enjoy if you enjoyed this one, and thank you for watching.